That was a lot, man. That was a whole goddamn lot to process. This is Made in Abyss reaching into its roots. This is Made in Abyss at its most fascinating, at its most tense, and at its most horrific. Hello everybody, I am Phenom Sage, and welcome back to another Made in Abyss Season 2, The Golden City of the Scorching Sun episode review. Today we will be talking about Episode 7, The Cradle of Desire. And yeah, man, on a purely visceral and emotional level, there is a lot to unpack in this week's story. And as much as I hate how people have reduced Made in Abyss as selling it as this overly grimdark horror series with a cute aesthetic, I really think there's just so much more to this series where you don't need to sell it with that kind of novelty. Despite me hating that, these are the kinds of episodes, just like Season 1, Episode 10, the MIDI flashback, the Bondrewd arc, these are all the moments that really remind you how this series even got that kind of reputation to begin with. And in terms of the actual content in this episode, I'm of two minds on it. On one hand, it was obviously fantastic, and despite being built up to for so long this season, it still lived up to the narrative weight and emotional weight that you would want it to have. You genuinely do feel that sheer terror and anxiety that this entire crew is feeling, being surrounded by this brutal, strange, hostile environment, just trying to survive and have this foothold in an area that you have no idea what's waiting 5 feet in front of you. And that feeling of dread just keeps getting larger and larger each time something goes wrong. The infected water, the wish-granting stone, the end of this episode, my lord, all of it just does that perfect job of creating that sinking feeling in your stomach that you would likely feel if you were actually in this situation. But on the other hand, there's a part of me that has a slight nitpick with this episode, and it has to do with the pacing. Now, I have to reiterate, just like I said last week, I am completely blind on the story now in this season. I have no idea what's going to happen. I don't know how this flashback will eventually conclude. I don't know anything. Which is why I'm not saying this as a comparison or as a, oh, the manga did it better type of comment, because I honestly have no idea which did it better or worse. But part of me was feeling while watching, especially in the earlier parts of the episode, that I really would have liked this entire flashback to be a double-length episode. I would have liked to see this episode and whatever is in next week's episode to not only be combined, but to flesh out the more procedural parts of the survival of this group in a way that has the opportunity to engross you even more. Because as it stands, I do think that they did an adequate job of bringing you into the environment and showing you what they needed to do to survive, but I think those feelings of dread and terror would be even stronger if it took a little while longer to get to the parts where everything starts going to shit. It starts unfolding very quickly, and you start having the problems of the episode, like the mutations from the water and the hollow transformations from the stone. All of that starts blending together when it all starts happening at once, when I think that in a longer, more expanded episode, you could really punctuate those things a lot deeper. Of course, there's also the argument that all of these things happening so quickly is the point. You want to feel that desperation of everything going wrong when it's all happening at the same time, which, fair enough, I can see that as well, but I would have still liked to see the more standard living in this environment, coming to grips with survival, the bondings between Vueko and Irumyuui, all of that stuff that was kind of montaged past. I would have liked to see it fleshed out more. However, as expected, it turns out that when you foreshadow and build up mysteries over half the season, entirely relying on a flashback, the flashback ends up answering those mysteries, and while it's not all over, we don't have all the answers that we need to our questions that have been building up, it does answer, or at least hint at the answer, to a lot of them. So now that I am completely blind, I can theorycraft guilt-free and probably turn out horribly wrong. For one, it turns out that, yes, that little girl's name in the flashback is Irumyuui, and if the end of the episode is any indication at all, she is slowly turning into what will eventually become the Hollow Village. However, I was wrong about a couple of things, and we also just get more information that kind of subverts what I was initially theorizing. For one, the heart-like orb that we saw in last week's episode, I said that it seemed to be a heart that had Vueco's star compass inside of it, but that actually doesn't appear to be the case. This relic just naturally has a star compass-like object in the center of it, and thematically, I don't think that's a coincidence. One of the interference units mentions how round relics in the abyss are the shapes of wishes, ones like the star compass that point you to your desires and ambitions, or ones like the wish-granting egg that literally transform you into your desires. And this isn't the only parallel that we see in this episode between a new piece of information and something that we've known for the entire series. One thing that's kind of implied about the tribe on the surface that we saw in episode 1 is that a child being born a girl seems to be a very rare occurrence, at least rare enough that the mother of Irumyuui was so vital to this village as to be in charge of birthing a lot of the tribe's people. Even in the glimpses that we get of them in episode 1, it all seems to be males, and Irumyuui is the only female that we really even see. That's a big assumption on my part, maybe that isn't the case, but in that same vein, it seems like Irumyuui was likely supposed to take that position on herself when she got older, but we see that she was outcast and abandoned when they found out that she was cursed not to have children. Now, I don't know if this curse that they're talking about is just genetic or a result of the abyss, but what we do know now is that in their village they have a tradition that sends these cursed people back into the abyss. A curse born of the abyss must be sent back. And all of this reminded me of way back in season 1, when Ozen talks to Riko about the curse that she received from the abyss when Liza carried her back up to the surface in the curse-repelling box. This is the curse that took her eyesight and requires her to wear glasses, and I talked about this all the way back then, but they make it a very strong point to indicate that this curse of the abyss that Riko has inherited might be the reason why, even from an infant stage, she was always drawn towards and seeked out the abyss. Thematically, all of this ties into that idea of being made in abyss. I'll hold for applause now. For real though, I just think that's pretty interesting, and it doubly applies when you consider what we learn about the tribe's people's markings as well, and the fact that they are mimicking the inhabitants of the Golden City, of which Reg is most definitely a part of when you look at his markings. We also find out presumably why Vuego blames herself for the village and everything turning out the way that it did, because she was the one in this episode that pushed for the use of this wish-granting egg to hopefully save Irumyuui and save everybody else who was afflicted. There's only 2 questions I have at this point that I assume will be answered next week when we get the rest of the flashback. One is, how does Faputa tie into all of this when we now see that Irumyuui is most certainly her own character and not what eventually Faputa turned into? And second, why was Vuego the only person in this squad who didn't end up turning into one of these hollows? Now, I could just wait for next week, but if you want my theory now as to what's going on with these, for one, I think the obvious answer to the second question is that Irumyuui protected Vuego from this curse. Now that she has this egg inside of her, it only makes sense that she can control who it affects and who it doesn't. And Vuego is the only real person that Irumyuui has formed a relationship with in this squad, so that makes sense there. As for Faputa, my only guess with this is that with these births and children that Irumyuui keeps spawning, maybe eventually she just managed to create something that could actually live. I doubt it just happened randomly, of course. There has to be an actual explanation for why that happened, but it would explain why Faputa looks so similar to Irumyuui, and just in terms of imagery and visuals, the glimpses we had of Faputa in the flashback looked as if something was being born, and specifically being born from what looked like a piece of the village. So all in all, I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. I'm just wondering what would change in Irumyuui where she's actually able to create something that can live long term. All of that being said though, my lord, the end of this episode was so crazy and so strong, giving you that what the hell moment. Wazu Kian, What the hell did you do? All of that really capped off the episode in a crazy strong and satisfying way. I can't wait to see how this all ends. Hwaju Kyeon in general, just a really surprisingly interesting and morally complex character. You expect him to be this really lighthearted and genuine dude, but as you can see here, he is not even hesitant when it comes to doing anything that it takes to survive. Just the sheer implication on his face that he could foresee everything that would happen, and that's why he was saying that Irumyuui would be their salvation. That gave me chills, man. He is such an interesting character. Even back at the beginning of the episode, when he saw the bodies of the two people that he sent back up in the elevator, dude wasn't even fazed. I am really curious what leads to his downfall in particular, where he ends up turning into one of these things as well. There was also another moment that I really liked in this episode where Vueko and Irumyuui are trying to keep this animal that they found, and I don't know if it was just the subs or if there was something in the dialogue to indicate it, but you hear Belaf almost trying to come up with an excuse in order to let them keep the animal with them. So I just thought that was a nice little bit of characterization that ended up endearing me to him more than I was beforehand, because, you know, up to now, he's kind of just been the regular scholar guy who's more about pragmatism and being rational. Overall, great stuff, another great episode. I had some small nitpicks, of course, about the pacing, but overall, it's just so great to finally be getting into this flashback and get answers to all of these questions that I've had. And speaking of answers, I swear to God, this is the last time I'm going to bring this up in these reviews, but on the topic that I have badgered into you guys about how Bondrewd could feasibly go into the 6th layer, go into the village, and come back, the question of how that would even be possible, especially when you consider that they literally called going into the 6th layer your last dive, why is he able to do these things nonchalantly? A couple of people smartly reminded me in the Discord and in the comments that that is literally the purpose of the cartridges. They take the brunt of the curse and let you maneuver in the abyss as much as you want. At this point, it really becomes a question of practicality. How many cartridges could it possibly take to get all the way to the village and then back up the layer into the elevator back to Edofront? I imagine even just for Bondrewd that would take many cartridges, and that's not even considering the fact that he also took Praying Hands down there with him. So it is kind of still a stretch even with this explanation, but it's still an explanation. I got the answer. I don't really care anymore. However, what I do care about is hearing what you guys thought about this episode in the comments or in the Discord server below. Let me know all of your thoughts, but keep it spoiler free now since I really want to stay blind for the rest of this arc. That's been all from me. I hope you are having a wonderful day. I love you all, and I will see you in the next video.